The Golden State Warriors just lost in 5 games in round two to the Minnesota Timberwolves. This was, of course, mostly due to Stephen Curry being out, but regardless, this roster had a ton of flaws that was probably going to keep them from winning the title anyways. I did pick Minnesota to win this series in 6, obviously, regardless of a Steph injury. But with that said, what can this Warriors team do to restructure the roster to come back and potentially compete for the 2026 championship? Will it require another big trade like the Jimmy Butler one, or some smaller stuff on the margins? Let's talk about it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video, and check us out over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you would like to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. As usual, we're going to be taking two approaches here to how they are going to go about this offseason. Obviously, this is just me speculating, and there's a lot of stuff that I probably did not think about that is very much on the table, but I like to do these exercises. They're fun. So first things first, what is Golden State's salary situation? Well, luckily, they're actually in a pretty good position, which is surprising to me because Jimmy and Steph both make $50 million plus, and I know Draymond makes 25, but other than Moody and Buddy Hield, as well as, I think there's someone else in there I'm blanking on, but Kevon Looney, whose contract is expiring, they don't really have a lot of major contracts. Those guys are around 8 to 10, and that's about it. So they're actually below both aprons, which is huge because it not only means they don't really have any kind of restrictions in terms of trading anybody, but they also have their full mid-level exception of $14 million per year, which can get you a damn good role player in free agency. They also have every first-round pick besides for this year and 2030, so they can trade up to 3 of their first-round picks if you put some protections on the 2027 pick in the middle. They also have young assets like Moses Moody, and Trace Jackson Davis, who closed the series pretty strong, all things considered. And they have the right to sign and trade Jonathan Kuminga. Now, that will be a big player here, a big factor here, because really, it's pretty hard for players to just leave their team in free agency. However, I don't think the Warriors are particularly interested in keeping Jonathan Kuminga on the roster. However, letting an asset go is not necessarily the right move. So if there is a team out there that is interested enough in Jonathan Kuminga and is willing to throw him an amount of money that is competitive with the rest of the league, the Warriors can facilitate making that happen and get something out of it in exchange. They also could just sign him and trade him on their own accord and not in a way that is incongruent with what Kuminga wants. One way or the other, he is potentially still an asset, even if he is not under contract currently. I think they would be foolish to not at least trade Kuminga. I don't think he fits there. My take about Jonathan Kuminga is that he is a player that is very good in certain contexts, and this Warriors context is not it. He started to ball out towards the end of the Timberwolves series as he was given more opportunity. I know he had that 30-point game, and I think he had a really good game 5 as well, but that's not enough. It's in a different context from what you want this team to be. You don't want Jonathan Kuminga being a 30-point scorer when you have Steph and Jimmy on the roster. At least you don't want Kuminga being that type of scorer in the context in which he's doing it, because the spacing with him, Jimmy, and Draymond is just atrocious. There is no getting around it. It's just bad, and you'd rather keep Jimmy and Draymond, so Kuminga has to go. I mean, maybe there's some people out there who want to trade Draymond Green, but I'll tell you what, the Warriors aren't trading Draymond Green unless some amazing opportunity crosses their desk. Another key factor in all of this that needs to be acknowledged that is entirely outside of their control is how well Steph, Draymond, and Jimmy age. I think Steph and Jimmy and Draymond have all aged pretty well up to this point, but there is generally a year where it starts to just completely fall off a cliff, and a player who was formerly easily an all-star is just no longer in that conversation. Draymond and Jimmy have already kind of fallen out of that. Jimmy in large part just because of his lack of effort in the regular season, but Steph is still superstar tier, and I think Jimmy is capable of it, even though he did not close and he didn't really show playoff Jimmy too much. He still had his moments in the playoffs this year, so you got to give him that. And Draymond Green, I think, is going to be at least a good defender his entire career. It's just a matter of if his driving can be respectable enough for the defense to care. I mean, he's already a bad offensive player, even with his playmaking in consideration, but I don't think he's going to get like unplayably bad. His defense and his passing instincts are always going to be there, I think, because his defensive ability is more about his brain than it is about his body, though the size that he has at the height that he has, the length that he has, does make him play bigger and allow them to do their small ball stuff, but I'm rambling at this point. Basically, those three need to be good, pretty much as good as they were this year, again, going into next year. And that is the thing that hurts the most about losing in this year's playoffs, because this may be the only year where Steph and Jimmy were actually capable of doing something like this. And if that were the case, well, then they did not hit that window. But I'm pretty optimistic that they can at least get one more year where this is a championship level trio. But as I mentioned, there is, and as you can probably see in the thumbnail, there are also some other ideas I have to where Draymond does not need to be the third best player on this team. But first things first, let's tackle what the conservative approach would look like. What does this team need out of their supporting pieces around those three players? Well, ideally, you would get a stretch five who can play defense, though those are a very rare commodity. There's not a lot of examples of players who can do that, and the ones who do exist are pretty damn expensive. You can probably find a five who can shoot or a five who can defend, but finding one who can do both is not easy, and having the price, paying the price for it is a hefty ask. Like Miles Turner has always been the prototypical go-to, hey, if you want to stretch five, go trade for that guy. But frankly, based on how good Indiana's been the last 2 years, I think they're going to be happy to bring him back, even though I know they've had some level of contract disputes. It's going to be tough to get that type of player, but it's something that they should seek out. Now, I'm not going to talk about it from this point on, but I did mention in my Celtics preview that isn't out yet because they haven't lost to the Knicks. But if they do, and even if they don't, if they still manage to come back, either way, probably suggesting Porzingis gets traded. And one of the teams that I thought could maybe find interest in him was the Warriors, because of course he would be the defensive stretch five. However, I think investing in Porzingis would be a very poor idea. I also think they could use a taller power forward who will add more height and length to the team, but allow them to maintain the mobility that they've had before. So not a center, but maybe someone who can play small ball center. One option, I have two pretty good ones here, is trading Kuminga for Naz Reid in a sign and trade swap, which I think you can do a double sign and trade, but maybe you can't, in which case you can go ahead and nix this. Maybe you sign it, maybe, I don't know, maybe a three-way. Pause? No, not pause. We don't need to do that. I'm an adult man. This would obviously also depend on if Naz Reid would be in the open market, but you could also possibly just do a Moody plus Buddy deal to get Naz Reid, and that would be great. But that as a tall player who can shoot, play defense, move well on the break, I think he would fit in. But another option, one that I think would be cheaper, both in terms of the assets that you're giving up and cheaper in terms of his contract, is Jabari Smith Jr. Houston is apparently interested in Naz Reid, ironically enough, and Jabari Smith Jr., though he was the number 2 or number 3 pick, I think, after Paolo and Chet for Houston, he is pretty damn good, but he is not starting for them. They found a lot of success without him in that starting lineup and him being more of a role player. Damn, of course my camera had to die. They just found more success with Dylan Brooks as well as Amen Thompson at their forward spots, so he did not end up getting a lot of opportunity. However, he played really well in the minutes that he did, and he played power forward and small forward. In fact, I felt like some of Houston's best minutes, I don't know if the stats would back this up, but it felt as though some of Houston's best minutes were when they had him at the 3 alongside Sengun at the 4 and Steven Adams at the 5. Houston is looking to make some big moves, and they also have some pretty big salary incoming, given that they're going to be paying Jalen Green $30+ million next year, unless of course they're going to be trading him. But they have a few young players coming up the pipeline who are going to need to get paid, and I think Jabari is going to end up drawing the short end of that stick. So I think the Warriors should swoop in and take full advantage of that. Jabari is 6'10". He has a 7+ wingspan. He is a good defender. He is a smart defender, and he is a versatile one. He can both block shots, play passing lanes, be a rim protector, switch onto the perimeter, guard in the post pretty well, all things considered, for the fact that he's kind of skinny. He's just definitely a really damn good NBA defensive player. Maybe he could be a little bit better for the potential that he has. Maybe he's a tad disappointing on that end. But at the end of the day, he's a good defensive player and he's a good three-point shooter. He hit 10 of his 22 three-point attempts in round one. And I definitely don't think he's like a knockdown shooter, but he's a good enough one for the defense to respect him and defend him tightly. Also has a mid-range pull-up game that's pretty good. Also a good finisher. Also really athletic, good in transition, someone who you can throw lobs to every once in a while. He's not a center, but he can play essentially the center. And if they're going to be starting Draymond anyways, between him and Draymond, it doesn't really matter who actually is labeled as the center and the power forward. His size and length will make the team bigger and still allow them to exist within small ball, you know? Like Jabari is your small ball five, but he's still 6'10", but he plays like a forward and he literally can play small forward, but he's also a center. Like, I think he would be a great target for the Warriors. And honestly, I think he would thrive in Golden State's system far more than he did in Houston. Houston did a lot of good things this year, but offensively speaking, for their role players, they did not make life easy for them. Jabari had to self-create a lot of his offense, and despite of the fact that he's a good athlete who can rim run and he's got a big target radius to catch the ball, just didn't get a lot of cut opportunities, didn't get a lot of fast break opportunities, and didn't get as many catch and shoot opportunities as he could have. So I just think within that Warrior system, Jabari would be great. And if you want to take anything away from this video, my hot take, the Warriors need to trade for Jabari Smith Jr. expeditiously. I also do not think that you need to do a Kuminga trade to make this happen, because Kuminga is probably going to demand more money than Jabari. Jabari only makes 9 to 10 million, and I think you could literally make this deal work for Moses Moody and a first-round pick, because Moses Moody is under contract for a couple more years. He's going to provide baseline pretty good 3-and-D for 20-ish minutes, which is exactly what seems to be Jabari Smith's role in Houston. So I think they would take that. We're just be like, okay, replace him in that salary slot. We don't have to pay more for him, and we get a pick out of it. That's a good deal for Houston. Maybe you throw in Pajimski instead of a first-round pick. It depends on what you value more, but I like that deal a lot. And if I'm the Warriors, I probably value a player who I know at the very least at a baseline is pretty good. I think a lot of the problems that Pods has as a player just simply comes from him being overburdened by the lack of creating and ball handling on this team. Even with Jimmy Butler there, he still has to do more than I think he's really capable of. Now, if the Celtics would be interested, you could do a Kuminga sign and trade plus Buddy Hield and a protected first round pick and get you Drew Holiday. I think Kuminga would only be something that the Celtics are interested in if Jaylen Brown is gone. But if they end up going the full blow the whole damn roster up approach, which I think is on the table, then a Jonathan Kuminga for Drew Holiday deal does make some level of sense. Like, that's a big upgrade to your defense, and honestly, their shooting consistency improves because, I mean, Drew did take a big dip in his shooting this previous year, but I do feel like he's a better one than Moses Moody. I could be wrong about that, but even if you did do that, you would still have Pods, Post, and Gary Payton off of the bench. But those are some pretty big trades, all things considered. Like, if you manage to pull off Jabari Smith and Holiday, like a lineup of Steph, Holiday, Jimmy, Draymond, and Jabari Smith Jr., that isn't a trade for a star player, but it is a hell of a duo of trades, and it'd be unlikely that they could pull both of them off. But even if you look at it as you get one of them and that's it, that's still pretty good. That's still a pretty big upgrade. However, I do think they could use at least two very big trades in order to round out this roster. If you get Holiday, that's not really an alternative for a big, so I would say if you're going to do Holiday, just start Post or Moses Moody and continue to play Draymond at center, but I would rather them get Smith because he's younger. Even though that doesn't really matter for this team, it will likely mean that he's healthier, and again, I just think they need to address the big more. And if you go for Jabari Smith, the positive of that is he doesn't make $30 million unlike Drew Holiday, so you can shop around for another guard. On the high end, you could get like a Norman Powell, but on a more medium end, maybe higher end, you get KCP or Dante DiVincenzo, and a more realistic range would be Royce O'Neal and Ochai Agbaji. Not that the Raptors are necessarily stoked to trade Ochai. I think you can get Royce O'Neal basically guaranteed, and he's a decent high-volume three-point shooter and a very good defender, though he is not adding a lot of length. If you already have Jabari Smith, you've already accomplished that, so you feel pretty good about it. So the two lineups I'll give you for a non-blockbuster trade are Steph, Drew Holiday, Moses Moody, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond Green, or Steph, Royce O'Neal, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and Jabari Smith Jr. And again, it is possible to get the Holiday and Jabari moves to work together. Those trade assets, it can exist separately from each other, but that is only if Boston would be interested in Kuminga, and I'm honestly not very, I doubt that. But now let's get kind of crazy with it. With Kuminga as a sign and trade option, Moody at the age of 23 on a pretty damn good long-term deal, Pods still on his rookie deal, and all of their draft picks, they have a hefty pool of assets here to move. So I think they have enough to get a star, especially if said star is interested in playing for the Warriors specifically. So if that option is on the table, who would they go for? Well, it would have to be someone obviously within reason to trade for, and honestly, there is little reason to worry about age here because their core three is old as hell, so you might as well trade for more players who are old as hell, although again, take injury risk into consideration, but you see who's in the thumbnail, so obviously don't take it into that much consideration. So it needs to be around the salary total of Kuminga after he gets a $100 million 4-year extension, so about $25 million a year. That is just the asking price of a guy who you think can be a 20-point per game scorer in theory, plus Moses Moody, Buddy Hield, Pods, Trace Jackson Davis, and Santos. In total, that gets you to $45 million in salary. So you need to trade for a player who is around there, and I believe because they're under the second apron, they have a little bit of wiggle room to go to like 50-ish million. I'm not certain of this. I would like to highlight that some of the cap stuff is just harder for me to understand ever since the rules have changed. I should probably read up on that stuff better before I do these videos, but didn't really have time. Lots of playoff stuff happening, so take everything with a grain of salt, like I said, but these are just ideas. Here are some names that I came up with, and I should highlight we obviously do not need to get a point guard, and ideally we could get a stretch big. So here are some names, and I'll give you a rough outline for a trade for them. Kawhi Leonard, obviously, you see him in the thumbnail. Lauri Markkanen, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant. And then how's this for out of left field? What about Zion? What about Zion? Yeah, what I said about injury risk, who gives a shit about that? We're playing 2K out here. Now, Durant and Booker are actually, I think, slightly out of or the realm of possibility, out of reach in their salary department, but there are ways to work around that, and they could even like just give Kuminga a more front-loaded contract to where like, yeah, you're getting 35 million this year and you're getting 30 next year and then 25 the next year after that and then 20, you know, whatever. Front loaded a little bit just so that you have more salary for the matching it of this year. But those are unlikely assets. I think the Suns will get more out of them than Kuminga in a first round pick. So let's go ahead and lay out the trade for the other three and what those fits would look like. Now, Lowry is a clear as day fit. While he is not a strong defender, he is not a terrible one, and he's tall and he's lengthy, and I'm confident that Draymond Green as well as Steve Kerr can coach him up and put him in the most advantageous position defensively going forward. Him having Draymond Green, who is capable of stepping up as a rim protector, is obviously a huge help. It would allow them to play big because now they have a 7-footer and they still have a super spaced floor because he's one of the better shooters in the NBA, not just for a big man, but period. He's also a 20-ish point per game scorer, and I know his numbers dipped for Utah this year, but he is a play finisher, not a like one-on-one score. He has a little bit of that to his game, but he's the type of player who is specifically meant to thrive within a system exactly like the Warriors. So I think with the Warriors, he would still be a 20 plus point per game scorer. And now you would have three of those guys, dudes who are at least capable of putting up 20 on any given night instead of two of them. So honestly, he's about as perfect of a third option as you could ask for. And he's probably going to be the second option in the regular season. Honestly, you could even go as far as having him be the first just because Jimmy and Steph are getting older. For Lowry, I would honestly think that Kuminga, Moody, and Pods would be enough because his contract is definitely a little bit rough for the fact that he is coming off of a down year. So his asking price is definitely kind of low right now. But I think I think you can just basically match salaries and maybe throw in a first, throw in 2, 3 good young players, and you can have another guy who can be an all-star caliber player who, goddamn, would Lowry work? Like, would he be a monster in the Warriors offense? Let me tell you. Now, as for the Kawhi deal, my logic is that the Clippers are very plausibly going to press the rebuild button in this offseason, and Kawhi could be a very good bang for your buck deal. He is absolutely a high risk, high reward acquisition, but he was healthy for almost all of the 2023-2024 season. He played a little under half of this previous season, and he was healthy for all 7 games of round 1. Now, he was not who he had been in the past in those 7 games, but hey, he was still very good, and he didn't even look a little hobbled. It wasn't like he acquired some sort of injury that he played through like has happened in the past. No, he was just a healthy player the whole way through. Similar to Lowry, I don't think you would need much outside of your base assets, and I would throw in a first, maybe 2 if one of them is protected. I don't think it's worth putting up 3 first-round picks on the line for Kawhi, even if it is for a last hurrah to get Steph a championship. I don't think you need to be that fast and loose with your future. So with either lineup, you would get Steph at point, someone at the 2, Jimmy at the 3, Kawhi at the 4, and Draymond at the 5. And with a Markkanen deal, it would be Steph at the point, probably, I don't know, again, blank on the 2 because Moody and Pods are not going to be there. Maybe Buddy Hield, Jimmy at the 3, Draymond Green at the 4, and Lowry Markkanen at the 5. With either of those core 4, you're going to be killing the game. They also still have their mid-level exception to sign a pretty damn good role player. I don't know who that would be, but if you get a pretty damn good 6-man on top of that, someone you're confident you can play 30 minutes per game in a postseason setting, then that is awesome, whether you go with the Lowry deal or the Kawhi one. I think the Kawhi one is a higher risk, while the Lowry route is safer, but has a little bit lower of a ceiling to it. So I would probably go with a Lowry deal even more than the safe route. I don't think this team should take the safe route, and Lowry is young enough that you can feel okay trading your younger players to get him. But finally, let's talk about that Zion deal, because that's definitely the very out there option. I think you would only do that if Draymond Green is going to be out the door, because I don't think you can survive having the spacing of Jimmy, Draymond, and Zion, even with the GOAT shooter on his team. That's not going to make up for it. So if Draymond is to be gone, well, he might as well be a part of this deal along with Kuminga. So you're going to manage to keep Pods, Buddy, and Moody. So I would also just go with Quentin Post as the starter at this point. Zion at the 4, allow him to be a lot of your physicality and size in the paint, and then Post just be a 7-footer around the basket. And you still have Buddy and Moody off of the bench. So I think that's a very out there idea, and it's not going to happen, but it would be interesting. But like I said, I love the Jabari Smith Jr. deal, so I would heavily consider that. But if you're deciding that you need to do a star trade, go get Lowry Markkanen. I understand he had a down year. I understand some people think he's overrated as hell, but I'm telling you, he is a monster of a play finisher, and as good as he has been at times for the Utah Jazz, you have no idea how good he could be if the right system is given to him. He could fucking cook in the Warrior system. So yeah, go play Lowry, go get Lowry Markkanen, and if you don't get Lowry Markkanen, go get Jabari Smith Jr. I just hope the Warriors do good stuff, because I want to see Steph win another championship before he retires. But yeah, that is it. Thank you so much, and goodbye.